Welcome to this instructional video on how to create a unique study trip, which is brought to you by the United Nations Youth Association Network. This video will guide you in your organization step by step and give you useful tips along the way. This will hopefully improve your study trip and in return bring you the best feedback possible. So, let's start with the basics. The organizational period will be very long, maybe even up to a year. Therefore, you want to make sure you bring together a team of trustworthy people who you can count on the entire period of organization and who will get the job done. Because the organization will be long and your to-do list will get longer and longer, it's sometimes hard to keep track of what's been done and what has yet to be done, especially when you work in a team. Therefore, always stay on the same page with your colleagues. A good way to do that is by having a shared to-do list on Google Docs, for example. This way you are always up to date on what is yet to be done. It's also important to make deadlines for the things on your to-do list. Sometimes these deadlines are given to you externally. The accommodation you want to stay in, for example, might ask you to pay by this and this date. But it's also good to have internal deadlines you give yourself so you never fall behind on schedule. Having said that, let's look at 3 things you want to start as soon as possible, highlighted here by the red warning sign. First, when do you start organizing? This can't start early enough. Depending on the sites and institutions you'd like to visit, the application deadline can vary heavily. Some are 6 months, some are 6 weeks before the visit. Same counts for the capacity of the accommodation you want to stay at, because during a busy tourist season, cheap hostels or hotels are easier to find the sooner you look. That's why we suggest to start organizing 6 to 12 months ahead of time. And remember to always keep track of all the deadlines given to you by the accommodation or by the places you want to visit. Next on the item is determining the trip's length. Determine this first and base your decision on the number of sites you'd like to visit. Invest some time researching potential highlights of your trip because you don't want to miss out on anything you and your participants would have liked to have seen. The third thing you want to look for ASAP is the accommodation, because affordable hostels and hotels are often booked out fast. 3 things you might have to let them know or you want to know from them are the number of participants. This number you'll probably not be able to give at this point of time. Therefore, look at how many people you can take with you, how big your subsidy is from your association, and how many people might be interested in your trip. Based on these calculations, so to say, give the accommodation your number of participants you expect to come. But because there's always the possibility that people spontaneously jump off or on, ask the accommodation until what point of time it is possible or whether it is possible at all for unexpected changes of guests, and ask them if they expect any fees if these numbers change. Finally, ask your participants for any specific food wishes and let the accommodation know about them, for example, vegan, vegetarian, and so on. But more on that later. Now that you've completed the most urgent things, you can slowly start booking tours. This is possible on most websites of institutions. Usually there's a site called Tours or Booking of Tours. If there's no such site, you have to apply a tour via email, which you can also find on the institution's website. Especially United Nations affiliated institutions welcome thousands of visitors each year, which is why their tours are mostly general and not very topic specific. But your group might already know the basic informations on the institutions or the topics they're working on. But because the institutions are under the mandate of public education, you can always ask for specific topics you would like the tour guides to talk about. This saves not only your time, but also the time of the experts working there. So in order to get a custom-made tour, you have to learn what level of knowledge your participants have. More on that later. And finally, ask the institutions about important infos they need from your participants. Because some have a high security level, they might ask you for the passport or ID numbers of your group members. But again, more on that later. Now to a topic which could alter everything, and that of course is money. The bigger the subsidy of your association, the smaller the trip costs. The smaller the trip costs, the bigger the group. It's as simple as that. So talk to your association and agree upon the size of subsidy you want to allow for the trip. This could include paying the accommodation for the participants or paying the travel costs of your participants. And remember, your participants are most likely to be students who live on a tight budget. Therefore, we recommend a participant's fee of 0 to 40 euros. However cheap your trip fees are, that is no use if no one knows that there's a study trip in the first place. So let's talk about marketing. Use every single channel of communication in your possession to get the word out. This means Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, emails, newsletters, and even flyers. And publish these posts and flyers as often as possible, but without ending up in the junk mail folder. The most important things you want to include in these posts are the time and date of the trip, the place you're visiting, the participant's fee, highlights or the so-called eye catchers, and how the people can apply. Which brings me to the next point, the application form. What you want to learn with this form is all the trips and tours relevant information. Because remember, the very general and possibly time-wasting tours, here's a way the participants can tell you what level of knowledge they have. For the application form, you can use Google Forms, Wufoo, Typeform, Lime Survey, and other services like these. What you have to include in the application form is the name and surname of the applicant, obviously, their age, email address, affiliation, so how they know of your trip or what group they are from, the accommodation, so whether the participant wants to stay at the hostel you organize or whether they will stay at a friend's place, for example, and also their food specifications, whether they're vegan, vegetarian, and so on. What you can ask about, depending on the services you will give to your participants, is the way of transportation to the city you're visiting, the passport number or ID number, as said for the tours if they need it, for example, previous knowledge on tour relevant topics, also as talked about before, and you can also ask about their Facebook name or mobile phone number for easier communication. And you can always ask them for questions or suggestions on the trip. If they have applied, you want to thank them for doing so with a small thank you mail. And this should include your bank information so the participants can pay the fee, the time and place you will meet for the first time in the city, and an info booklet if you have one. So, these are all the steps you have to take for a successful trip. If you want to make your participants even happier, you might want to include these alternate 3 steps. First, the info booklet. Your participants want to feel safe in the hands of your organizing hands and don't want any questions unanswered, which is why an info booklet before the trip is very, very useful. This should include the addresses of the accommodation you will stay at, the addresses of the institutions you will visit, tips on how to best arrive at the hostel or the hotel via plane, train, and automobile, which is why you should include the way of transportation in the application form, and emergency numbers. And because your participants are here to learn, you can also include a few infos on the places you will visit in the booklet. Either that, or you could also organize a pre-workshop with these contents. This could be online or offline if you have the capacities to organize an offline workshop. You could, for example, invite an expert who could share his or her knowledge to your group about certain institutions you'll visit or the topics the institutions are working on. And you can also open up the workshop to other people who are not traveling with you, but are still interested in the topic. And finally, the easiest way to communicate important infos to your group before and during the trip is on a group on WhatsApp, Facebook, Telegram, or whatever. Plus, the participants could also already start getting to know each other before the trip, which is always good. So, there you have it. This is how you organize an awesome and unforgettable study trip. If you have any questions or you just want to show appreciation for this video, find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.